centuries, man has waged war upon one another for a multitude of reasons. For land, power, resources, wealth, and maybe just simply because they don't like the look of one another. But have you ever considered, what is a war? What distinguishes a skirmish from a conflict? Or a conflict from a battle? Is it the amount of troops involved? The square meterage of the encounter? Or maybe how long the engagement lasts? Well, today we're going to find out the parameters for war don't need to be as grandiose as you might think. Today on His and Hers History, we are going to review the shortest war in history, the Anglo-Zanzibar War of 1896.
And are you going to be speaking with that accent the whole time, Aaron?
Maybe, I don't know. If I feel like it. I mean, I've got my gin in hand. It might flow
Your
from
what?
me. My
Your,
gin.
Your gin?
Oh. It might flow from me.
A G-rated podcast, I thought.
No.
mean,
Gin's fine. Hello, everyone, and welcome to His and Hers History podcast.
Hello.
I'm your host, Aaron, and this is my co-host, Stephanie.
Hello.
Okay. Today we're going to be reviewing the shortest war in history, the Anglo-Zanzibar of 1896.
Which, I have, admittedly,
Yes.
maybe heard a little bit about already.
Pray do tell.
Well, we've already had a first draft of this podcast. There was an issue, though. Not a technical issue. It was
Yes. Go on.
an Aaron issue.
Yes, please. Okay, tell me about it.
I would say maybe the rate of normal words to the word okay.
It appears I have an addiction to saying okay.
So apologies if
It's
that
probably going to
becomes a problem
happen
in
a
this
lot
draft.
throughout this podcast. I'm going to say that word.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Without further ado, here we go. So, Steph, how long do you think the Anglo-Zanzibar War of 1896 might have lasted? Now, please don't blow this out of the water. Pick a reasonable time. How long do you think the shortest war in history might have gone?
Was it a couple of minutes? Maybe
Okay.
30 plus.
Okay, you may have heard this before when we messed up our recording, but yes, it was only 30.
Smart.
Hey?
Just that smart.
Yeah, maybe you are. Maybe you just know a lot about Anglo-Zanzibar and its war, I guess.
That's
But it
what
went
just
for 38 minutes, a grand total of 38 minutes. So
Which admittedly is a lot shorter than I originally thought.
yeah, that's right. Originally you said it was a week, and then I was like,
I was
"Ooh."
trying to be nice
Yeah,
to you.
that's right. Well, it ruined the vibe, but we've sort of done that already. But yeah, that's the thing I want you to sort of consider while we're looking at this story is what is considered the parameters of a war. So it's obviously not time that we've figured out together that it can be any length of time, okay? And we'll soon find out there's some other parameters that probably should be in place for a war, but aren't. But we'll
In
find
this
out.
particular
Yeah,
one,
in this
okay.
particular
Okay.
story, okay. So,
Okay.
part 1, setting the scene. Okay. So a bit of context. Zanzibar, do you know where that is? How's your geography?
We know it's not great.
Yeah, your navigation skills in general aren't great.
Yeah. But I do believe it is in Africa.
Yes, you are correct. It is in Africa. It is in East Africa, to be precise. So it's off the coast of Zanzibar. Sorry, not Zanzibar. It's off the coast of Tanzania. It's about 30 kilometres or 20 miles if you use that measurement. Okay. So our story takes place on the island of Zanzibar. Okay. On their main, there I go again. Okay, you might start a tally. There's 2 for you. And it takes place on the main island, Unguja. There's going to be some butchering of some local words and names in this podcast. Okay.
It's okay. I'm cringing along with you.
Yeah, it's okay. Just bear with me. All right. So our story takes place in Zanzibar. So in the late 1800s, there were 2 superpowers roaming around the planet, taking over a range of places. Who do you suppose they might have been, Steph? Who were some great imperial superpowers that were around in the 1800s?
Oh, for sure we have to assume the English were involved.
My accent at the start may have given that away, but yes, the British. And do you know of another?
Well, there are many.
Yes.
Could
well,
it have been the Spanish?
No, it's not the Spanish.
The Germans?
It is the Germans. Well done.
Africa, of course.
Sorry?
Africa, of course.
Yeah, Africa. They both loved a bit of Africa. Apparently. They were both there. So yes, and as we know, the British and the Germans, they haven't been the best of friends over history. What do you think I might be referring to there, Stephanie? two big major events that happened in the world. They were on opposing sides.
The World Wars, Aaron.
Yes, World War One and World War Two. You're right. Okay. But it turns out in the late 1800s, they were kind of friends, the German and the British. And I say that because in 1890, they both signed a treaty called the Heligoland-Zanzibar Treaty. And what that did is it gave the British control of Zanzibar and the Germans control of mainland Tanzania. Okay? There we go. There's another one. I cannot help it. This is going to be riddled with them, okay? So they were friends, it would appear, because you'd need to be friends to sign a treaty with someone, wouldn't you? I mean, I
can think of some events where treaties may have been signed without being friends. Lots.
What are you referring to? Is there any in particular?
The Treaty of Versailles.
The Treaty of Versailles, yeah, that's one. It's a pretty big one.
Indigenous treaties that were signed.
Oh, yeah, that's
lots of those.
That's not a great one. So maybe you don't need to be friends. Maybe you're just horrible empires that just do what they want, pretty much, and take over whatever they see.
Look, that does sound on brand for them.
Yeah, it was kind of their thing, wasn't it? The British, like,
it really was,
just to invade somewhere and pretty much do as they pleased. So anyway, after they signed this treaty, the British moved into Zanzibar and set about installing is probably not the right word, but putting a sultan in the chair to run Zanzibar pretty much. And this guy was, here we go, butchering a name inbound, Hamad bin Thuwaini. Okay, so in 1893 they appointed him the Sultan of Zanzibar, and their main reason for doing this was because he was sympathetic to British rule. But Steph, do you think he was sympathetic to British rule, or maybe just someone that didn't want to be,
Well, I think in desperate times you need to make decisions, don't you? And you need to make the decision that's best for you, and I'm sure that life is better than the alternative.
I would 100% agree with you. So if I was in his shoes, this ginormous empire has just signed a treaty basically saying I own you and your land, and then they walk up to you and they go, hey, do you want to be like our sort of puppet leader? You just do what we say, and you get like all these awesome like
perks,
and kickbacks. I'd probably take it. I mean, it's going to be better than any other option he had. So when it says he was a sympathiser, I highly doubt that. However, he took up the role and worked for the British nonetheless. Part 2, the build-up. So the British sympathiser, in quotation marks, Hamad, he served in bliss and harmony for about 3 years as the Sultan. And until August of 1896, where he just up and died out of nowhere. Okay, poor Hamad, he just died. He croaked it. Now, I hear you ask, Steph, how does a perfectly healthy British sympathising Sultan, who's presumably of sound body and sound mind, and receives the best of 1896 Zanzibar, how does someone like that just die?
Look, as most suspicious deaths, I'm thinking poison.
Okay, I'm a bit concerned to be near you because you went straight to poisoned. I mean, maybe heart attack? Could have been a good guess.
You said he was healthy. That's not fair.
Old age? I'm just assuming he was. Old age? Maybe a tragic accident? No, straight to poisoned. Anytime that someone...
No, that's not fair because you said that he was healthy.
I assumed he was healthy.
Planted a red herring.
Anyway, I assumed he was healthy. But you went straight to poisoned. I'm a bit concerned. I'm not sure I should be around you anymore because that's a bit scary. But yes, spoiler alert, he was poisoned. Okay, allegedly. Okay, allegedly he was poisoned. So it's not really known how Hamad died, but it's assumed that he met foul play at the hands of his cousin. So enter our first His and Hers History villain, which I'm sure there'll be plenty of in the future. Now, I've got a little picture of our villain here.
Villain. You're going to vilify someone in the first episode.
I'm straight up vilifying this guy, and you'll find out why, okay?
You'll probably learn that Aaron's a lot more black and white.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, that's a fair way of putting it.
I do see shades of grey.
For the sake of this story, he's a villain.
Okay.
He's a villain, and you'll see why. So what I'm going to do here is, obviously, no one can see what our...
We can put it in the comments if you have a photo.
I've got a photo of our villain. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the name of the cousin who allegedly killed Hamad, his name is Khalid bin Barghash. Khalid bin Barghash. Again, sorry. Okay. So I'm going to show you a little picture of this fellow. What do you think? Villain? I mean, the facial expression.
He doesn't look like a villain at all, Aaron. He looks like a normal guy.
Well, I mean, you know, he's got those steely eyes. Like, he looks like he wants to wage a war, maybe a really short war. I'm not sure about that.
That was fake. Just a really bad segue.
That was, yes, pretty much. And I'm pretty sure that's fake Gucci he's got there. That's not the real deal. So, it's presumed that Khalid poisoned his cousin. Although there's no solid evidence to suggest this claim, his following actions didn't do him any justice. So, an hour or two after Hamad, rest in peace, tragically passed away, Khalid moved into the palace and declared himself the sultan. So, I'm not a detective, but I'm pretty sure this Khalid bloke might have killed Hamad. I mean, that's pretty sus. Hamad dies and he moves in an hour or two later and he just declares himself sultan. That reeks of villain. I don't know about you, Steph, but I know he's kind of sounding like a villain. But we'll press on. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. We'll see what happens. Okay.
If I know you at all, you have not given him the benefit of the doubt.
Absolutely not. Okay.
And also, we're coming at this from 100 plus years later.
Yeah.
I feel like you might have a bit of information that you're not
perhaps
sharing.
I might be alluding to that.
It
hasn't aged well, Khalid's reputation, but we'll press on.
All right, please go on.
So this might have worked in any other situation because normally a sultan or a king or something like that is hereditary. So assuming Hamad had no sons and daughters, a cousin would seem like a likely suitor. Okay. However, Zanzibar was owned by the British, as we know, and they have to appoint their new sultan. You can't just walk in there and assume the position, okay? So the British heard about Khalid's little escapade into running Zanzibar as the new sultan, and they were none too impressed. But as we'll find out, this Khalid character, he's quite the risk taker. He just seems to roll with the punches and he gets on with things. He's a man of action and he's a man with a plan.
Well, I imagine if you kill your cousin, you are a man with a plan. You'd certainly
hope so. I mean, he's killed the sultan. I mean, he is a British sympathising sultan, but he's killed him, allegedly, and moved in. You'd want to have a plan because the might of the British Empire is sitting right outside the door.
Okay? Go on.
So, word of his little adventure got around the island pretty fast, and soon the British diplomats were catching wind of it and they were getting ready to deal with it. So they went to their chief diplomat of the area at the time, who's a man by the name of Basil Cave. So enter our first His and Hers History hero. He was the chief diplomat of Zanzibar, Basil Cave. His name screams British diplomat, by the way. I couldn't think of a better name than Basil Cave. I mean, off the top of my head, I can think of
I only know one Basil.
Basil
Brush.
Yeah, that's immediately what I thought. He does not.
And he is British, to be fair.
He is, but he's no diplomat. I mean, he was a psychopath, pretty much. Anyway, so the diplomats explained to Basil Cave what had happened to poor old Hamad, and I assume he was devastated because he was a British sympathiser and he did as he was told. And this is probably going to provide more work that Mr. Cave doesn't need, so he was probably upset. And then he probably thought, well, we'll just appoint another one, just like Hamad. And then he was told of Khalid's actions and what had happened, and he was probably like, that's not going to work. So he told Khalid, you need to up and leave. And to which Khalid replied, no, and immediately started gathering his forces from around the palace. So Mr. Cave, he was nice. He said, hey, Khalid, you can just leave, mate. Like, no harm, no foul. We're not going to do anything. You can just go about living your life. But he doubled down and said no. And you'll find out later on in this story that Mr. Cave is quite polite. Okay, he does the best thing by Khalid. But Khalid constantly, throws it back in his face.
I do wonder if you're looking at this story from a very British perspective.
I mean, potentially, but this guy, there's more to come.
You're calling this guy evil.
He's kind of a bit of a psychopath, and you'll see why as the story unfolds, because none of his choices that he makes are that of someone with a sound mind.
Okay.
Who's capable of making rational decisions. But you'll soon see. Side note number 1. Okay, there'll be a few of these throughout the story. This Khalid bloke, how is the balls on him to think he can get away with this? He's allegedly killed the Sultan. He's moved in. He's claimed power. And he thinks he can take on the whole British Empire all by himself. Like, I almost want to barrack for him. Now, you're saying I think he's a villain. I sort of want to barrack for him in this story.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? Like,
Yeah.
You'd barrack for him?
No, because I don't know all the facts yet.
Okay.
You are
Actually,
black and white.
Great point. Great point. We'll press on and we'll find out a bit more. Second side note. How about the troops around the palace? Their Sultan dies, and this new guy just walks in and goes, "I'm the new Sultan." And they all just went, "Yep, righto."
Well, that's why I think you're thinking of this from a British perspective.
Oh, maybe I may have overlooked this Khalid.
They feel oppressed by the British.
Potentially.
Maybe the guards side not with the
you
British.
You think they're in on it? Oh my God.
Quite possibly.
Maybe there's more to this plot. Let's find out. So anyway, I think the troops maybe just had no backbone and just went with it. Okay? Or maybe this Khalid guy was just so charismatic and charming, he just got them all on board. Mm-hmm. Just like that. So, after telling Mr. Cave to get stuffed, and he started to fortify the palace that he was in, and he rounded up approximately 3,000 men, several artillery guns, which are actually gifts given to the previous Sultan, Mr. Hamad, who is now dead. Rest in peace. So he had a somewhat fortified palace, 3,000 men, and a few artillery guns. And this all took place on the 25th of August. So not bad in a day's work. I mean, he dethroned the Sultan rather easily. He took control easily. And yeah, he's pretty much running the joint.
So how many men did you say he had?
Approximately 3,000.
Right, it sounds like a lot, but I'm guessing against the British Army, it's probably not going to go in their favour.
The British Empire, I'm just guessing, but I think they've got more than 3,000 men.
At this point?
Yeah,
absolutely.
At this point, yeah. And of those 3,000 men, how many of them were troops? Some were probably maybe servants, butlers, I don't know. Mm-hmm. I'm just assuming here, but I'm sort of guessing that they weren't all troops. Side note number 3, Khalid also acquired a modestly armed royal yacht in the harbour nearby. So it had guns and armour and things on it. And yeah, I assume he was going to use that in the battle. I mean, not sitting in the harbour. We'll find out later in the story that it's not as useful as it seems. And also, he kind of sounds like the first ever James Bond villain. Don't you think? I mean,
I am getting that. I'm getting that vibe.
That's hence the supervillain vibe I'm putting out here. Like, he's got an armoured yacht. I mean, it kind of reads like a James Bond book. I can't remember the author of James Bond. I think it's Ian Fleming or something like that. But I'm pretty sure he might have stolen this Khalid character for some of his villains because, you know, he dethrones the really good Sultan that everyone loves. You know, he takes over the palace. He summons his troops. All that's missing is James Bond to just waltz into the palace and have like a monologue off with him, and then, you know, they have a battle or something. Like, he sounds like a supervillain from a Bond film movie. Mm-hmm. I mean, Daniel Craig, if you're out there, the Anglo-Zanzibar War of 1896, James Bond movie would be awesome.
Are you suggesting time travel?
Yeah, I know it doesn't fit into the time travel. I mean, it's like, 70 years maybe before?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, anything's possible. He's James Bond. I mean, we can do anything. Anyway, pressing on. So without even lifting a finger, the British already had but 2 warships, the HMS Philomel and the HMS Rush, sitting in the harbour full of troops. So this Khalid fellow, for all his work, the British have done nothing, literally nothing, and they already have 2 warships loaded with troops ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
So
this is what I predicted would happen.
he's already at a disadvantage, poor old Khalid, but he's not bothered by that. He presses on regardless, okay? This does not deter our brave rebel Sultan King, okay? He's defiant to the British still. So after the news of Khalid invading, the British troops on these ships were quickly sent ashore to help prevent the local townsfolk from rioting, which I assume they did nothing. They've been under British rule for however many years at this point. They probably just did as they were told, like normal. There was probably no idea of rioting because they were like, well, they're the British Empire. They're just going to squash us if we do. Okay? So finally, as if the British hadn't flexed their muscle enough at this point, they called in a third warship that was just happened to be floating around in the area, and it came into battle against Khalid and his band of merry men, and this was the HMS Sparrow, and it entered the harbour that evening of August the 25th. So at the end of day one's proceedings, Khalid the False One, that's right, I've given him a villain nickname, okay? I thought Khalid was just too plain and simple, so he's Khalid the False One because, you know...
Hang on, is this something you've given him?
Yes, I've given him this title because
sure
he's not the real Sultan. He's not the real Sultan. He's the false one. So I'm going to call him Khalid the False One, and I'll refer to him as that throughout the story because it works with my narrative. Okay. So anyway, Khalid the False One has roughly 3,000 men, as I mentioned, a few bits of artillery, a somewhat fortified base, albeit a rushed one, and a James Bond villain yacht sitting in the harbour. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Side note number 4. I'm pretty sure that Khalid's armoured yacht would be parked right beside the British warships because they're in the same harbour, making it useless, I would assume, because how is Khalid going to get from the palace down to the docks to get onto his yacht? I mean, is he just going to say to the British, hey, can I come use my yacht? And they're just going to let him? Like, that's not going to happen. Interesting.
Not much forward planning going on there.
It's looking like he didn't do any planning at all. He may have just rushed into this willy-nilly. But that's where he stands. Now, as for Mr. Cave and the British Empire, at this point they have 3 warships, God knows how many troops, they own the island, and, they have the whole of the British Empire at their disposal. So, I don't know about you, Steph, at this point in the story. I'm sort of leaning towards the British maybe winning this battle, or this war, as it is. What are your thoughts?
I can't imagine any other way.
Yeah, it's not looking good for Khalid.
It's just not.
It's not looking great at all. Part 3, time for action. Even though Mr. Cave had enough firepower at his disposal to deal with the self-appointed Sultan, he still required permission to launch his attack, so he had to send a telegram to the Foreign Office that night. Now, I've already done British accents throughout this. There's another British accent inbound. I do British accents. I do a range of accents, and I'm not going to apologise. Some of them good, some of them bad, but here goes. So Mr. Cave wrote to his superiors, "Are we authorised in the event of all attempts at a peaceful solution proving useless to fire on the palace from the men of war?" And basically what he's saying there, Steph, I don't know if you could decipher that British speak. Do you know what he was saying? Do you know what he was saying there?
No. I was actually more thinking how blown away I was by your very posh accent.
Yeah. Well, he's Mr. Cave. He's a diplomat. Of course he'd have an accent like that. Of course he would. But basically what he was saying is, do I have permission to blow this guy to kingdom come if he doesn't comply?
Mm-hmm.
So he's written that to his superiors, and he's now waiting for a reply from them. So in his downtime, while he's waiting for that, Basil continues, probably in the most British way possible, to ask Khalid to politely bugger off and leave the palace. But his demands, surprise, surprise, were met with silence. Khalid is not a great communicator. He's a man of action, but he's not a great communicator. So he was giving old Basil the silent treatment. It was very, very sassy indeed.
Very sassy.
Massive power play, might I add. I mean...
BDE.
What's that?
BDE.
Oh, massive BDE on this Khalid fellow. He just gave Basil the old forks, just straight up. So the next day, to put the already heavily backed favourites further in front, the British called in, that's right, another 2 warships. Okay? The HMS Raccoon, awesome name, by the way, and the HMS St. George, bringing the total number of warships floating in the harbour to 5. Okay?
Why would they name a ship Raccoon?
Well, I was just about to elaborate on that. I like to think it's a little tugboat that they like bring along. It's like their little, you can do it, let's go. I don't know, something like that. It's a HMS Raccoon, and the other ones, they're called HMS St. George. I mean, like, regal names, and then there's one just called Raccoon. Yeah, strange. Maybe it's led by a bunch of misfits.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe some privateers.
Well, unfortunately, we don't find out because I couldn't find any more information on the HMS Raccoon. I did look into it. Now, Steph, I hear you crying out over there. Surely this is enough to deter the clearly determined Khalid. But by this stage of the story, if you haven't figured it out and you haven't come to the same conclusion as me, is that Khalid is clearly insane, he's incapable of any rational thought, and he's soon going to pay a hefty price for his actions.
They are some big claims.
They are big claims, but to be fair, everything he's put forth so far, I mean, do you blame me? He's clearly insane. Like, this is not boding well for him. So, finally, after waiting overnight, Mr. Cave received a telegram from his superiors. Another British accent inbound. His superiors stated, "You are authorised to adopt whatever measures you may consider necessary, and will be supported in your actions by Her Majesty's government. Do not, however, attempt to take any action which you are not certain of being able to accomplish successfully." Again, deciphering that jargon, basically what they said is, yeah, absolutely, you can blow this guy to kingdom come, do what you got to do, but whatever you do, don't muck it up, because we're the British Empire, and we'll never live it down if we lose to this half-wit. Pretty much that's what they're saying. Like, you can do it, but don't lose for whatever you do. Then Mr. Cave levelled the final ultimatum to Khalid to surrender peacefully, and he was even nice enough to allow him the opportunity to do so until 9 a.m. the following day. But Basil, he must have had a hunch that Khalid probably wasn't the best decision maker. I don't know what gave it away. But that night he told all non-military boats to leave the harbour to avoid the inevitable conflict. So Basil, he saw the writing on the wall. This guy is not going to give up. We're going to have to engage with him. And so he let the locals move out of the way. Finally, the following day at around 8 a.m, 1 hour before the deadline, Khalid finally replied to Mr. Cave's generous offer, stating, now, I'm not going to do
Generous offer.
Yeah, his generous offer. Well, it's been pretty generous.
My goodness, we're dealing with the English elitist.
It's certainly, it's looking that way, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm sort of on the British side in this, but
You
I can't help
are.
it. I sort of said I
Very
was barracking
unlucky.
for this Khalid fellow, but he's an idiot. He's an idiot. And so I sort of want the British to deal with him, but we'll see what happens. I'm not going to do an accent for Khalid because I don't know what his accent would have sounded like. Okay, but this is what Khalid said to Mr. Cave. "We have no intention of hauling down our flag, and we do not believe you would fire upon us. Basically, you don't have the guts," he said to Mr. Cave. "You don't have the guts. You're not going to fire on us. We can do what we want." To which Mr. Cave quickly replied, British accent inbound once more, "But unless you do as you are told, we shall certainly do so. Basically, mate, if you don't do as you're told, I'll smash your face in." He was nice yeah, that's right. He was nice up until this point, and he's like, "Mate, last straw. If you don't do as you're told, I'm going to smash your face in."
Wow.
To put it in layman's terms.
So he thinks he can come into this country and control it.
He knows. He's already done it. The Anglo-Zanzibar war that's about to happen proves that he can do what he wants. Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm wondering, how is it that this war was so short? Is it that everyone was mowed down straight away? Or is there another possibility?
We're building up to that, okay? I'll let you just fester on that and come to your own conclusions. Think about what it might be. And perfect timing, might I say. Part 4, the shortest war in history. That was the last of the interactions between the two men, and at 9 a.m. the order was given for the British ships in the harbour to begin bombarding the palace. Within 2 minutes, Khalid's artillery had been destroyed, and his swiftly built fortifications were just as swiftly brought back down. The shelling of the palace continued for another 38 minutes, and finally ceasing at 9:40, bringing a close to the shortest war in recorded history. So I said at the top that war sort of requires two sides, I would have thought, to be fighting back against one another.
It was basically just one guy getting wrecked.
It was like the schoolyard bully. He pinned the kid up against the wall and just smashed his face in. And that was the end of it. There was no firing back. There was no anything. They just stood there and took it. Okay. Now you're probably wondering, what happened to our supervillain Khalid, the false one?
Oh my.
What fate befell our defiant anti-hero? Surely he was found amongst the rubble after bravely fighting until his very last breath. Well, no, that's not what happened. About 2 minutes in, allegedly, he found a back exit and he buggered off. Okay? And he left all of his
What a brave leader.
Yes, that's right. He left all of his brave, albeit stupid troops in the palace to be shelled into oblivion.
So there was death.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Oh, at the top of this episode, I thought you said it didn't matter how much death there was.
Well, I was alluding to the fact that you'll soon find out, but Khalid's forces suffered quite a bit, but the other side, not so much, okay?
I can imagine that.
Yeah. But don't worry about Khalid. He will re-enter our story a little later on. Part 5, the aftermath. Although the war, if you can call it that, was incredibly short, there was actually a high casualty rate, with approximately 500 of Khalid's fighters either killed or wounded in battle.
In 30 minutes.
38 minutes, remember? Shortest war in history. But yes, pretty much that's what happened. 500 either killed or wounded. And if my maths is correct, that's about a sixth of the total forces. And the British, they suffered untold losses in this engagement. They lost a grand total of 0 troops, which is easy to understand considering they basically just sat there and loaded and fired artillery for the best part of an hour without so much as a whimper coming from the troops inside the palace. Side note number 5, although the British didn't suffer any casualties, I did find out that there was one petty officer who was severely injured and later recovered in hospital. Now my mind runs wild. Did he slip on the deck and hurt his back? Or did he get carpal tunnel in his wrist from pulling that cord on the artillery? How did this bloke seriously injure himself and then end up in hospital? I don't know. I'm lost for words as to how this bloke could have possibly injured himself.
Are there no records of what injuries he
I couldn't
gained?
find it. All I found was that he was severely injured.
Severely injured.
Severely injured and recovered later in hospital. Imagine being the only guy in that battle, or that war, for the British, who was injured, and all of his mates are visiting him in hospital and saying, mate, how on earth did you get hurt? Maybe he got walked in front of the artillery. I don't know. It's really strange. I've got no clue how he might have been. After this unnecessary ordeal was finally over, the British picked up the pieces and set about appointing a new pro-British sultan who would serve for the next 6 years. Ah yes, another sympathiser, just like Hamad. Remember Hamad? Peaceful, non-psychotic sultan. Just did as he was told. Didn't start fights with imperial superpowers. Yes, good old Hamad. Rest in peace. Part 6. Khalid the False One. One loose end to tie up. The fate of Khalid. Well, it turns out when Khalid fled the battle, he took with him some loyal soldiers. That's right, this guy still had the charisma and charm to maintain some followers to follow him willingly and do his bidding and leave the battle. I mean, what was his pitch to them? They would have seen that they were losing and they were destined to lose. How did he convince these guys to come with him and escape? Probably the same way he convinced them to fight the war in the first place. So this small group found refuge at the local German consulate. That's right, the Germans are back, and they aren't anywhere near as chummy with the British this time. Because Khalid hid away, and despite Britain's calls to have him extradited, he was smuggled out of the country on the 2nd of October by the German Navy and taken to the German-occupied Tanzania.
See, I told you they weren't as chummy as
yeah,
they first
well,
appeared.
it's certainly, they were handshake agreement, they were best of buds, but as soon as the Germans had a chance, they just, they got one over on the British. Sorry to any Germans that listen to this, but that's just the way it happened. Yep, the Germans took their chance, okay, and it might have put maybe a little bit of fuel on the fire for future events. I'm, of course, alluding to World War I and World War II. So after being smuggled into Tanzania, Khalid lived there for many years, no doubt living off the tall tales of his brief reign as the Sultan of Zanzibar, until, booyah, World War I rolled around. That's what we were talking about earlier. And the British invaded a German-occupied East Africa. And in 1916, caught up with Khalid and renewed their acquaintances. After his capture, Khalid was taken to St. Helena for exile and served out some time there. Again, if your geography is not great, St. Helena was a British-owned volcanic outpost found in the South Atlantic Ocean, and coincidentally is where Napoleon Bonaparte was sent for exile and died there.
Do you know this?
You knew that? Well, there you go.
Do.
I say coincidentally because Napoleon Bonaparte and Khalid are both huge figures in our history. Maybe not Khalid, but I thought that was a cool fact anyway. And after serving out some time there, he was released. And he returned to East Africa and lived out the remainder of his days until he died in 1927. So he basically just got away with it. Like, he served a bit of time, and they were just like, you've done your time. Off you go. He got away with it.
The world did change after World War I.
Yeah, that is true. Maybe they were a bit more sympathetic to his cause. Now, I've just got some final notes here to finish off the first podcast of the His and Hers History, the shortest war in recorded history. Khalid actually tried to assume the throne once before. Okay, so he wasn't going in totally blind. So I said he was a man with a plan, and he was kind of a bit insane and didn't know what he was doing. He tried it once before. I assume probably passive aggressively, and maybe it didn't work, and hence his super aggressive tactics the second time around. Okay. And one last final note. I did sort of paint him out as to be this insane supervillain, incapable of rational thought. But he does win some browning points back because he was against slavery that existed on the island. So he kind of might have been a good guy, like you said he may have been, okay?
I told you, it's not all black and white.
Yeah, I know. But it suited the story. Okay. And he really hated and was against Hamad because he was so compliant and he didn't do anything about it. So his intentions may have been good, but the way he went about it was...
Execution, yes.
Yeah, his execution and intent was slapdash and pretty poor.
Especially against the greatest superpower.
The greatest superpower probably that's ever been in the world,
Wouldn't say that.
Yeah.
Have you heard of a little thing called Rome?
Well, that's true. Well, we might learn about them in a future episode. You never know. So that brings a close to the end of our first episode of the His and Hers History podcast.
Thanks, Aaron.
Where we learned. That's fine. I hope you learnt something, and I was very knowledgeable.
I did.
And that you learnt that you can, paint anyone out to be a super villain if you write it the right way. Pretty much. But we learned about the shortest war in recorded history, which I thought would be a nice topic to start off with.
A nice topic.
Yeah, well, it's got a super villain in it. It's got good guys. It's got British people.
Poison, allegedly.
It's basically a James Bond movie. So
set in the past, of course.
Yeah, set in the past. Well, time travel, that's implied. I mean, it's James Bond. He can do what he wants. And this coloured guy, he was evil, so it makes for a good story. But on to yours, your His and Hers history topic. Is there anything you would like to tell me? Maybe a clue or something? Because I obviously have to know at least what it's about, so that we can check that I don't know the exact topic. But is there anything you'd like to share with me? Maybe a clue as to what you might be covering?
Look, I think you know a little bit about these people that I'm covering next week. It's about explorers, and it has something to do with a tent and a pan.
A tent and a pan. Okay. I'm getting Brokeback Mountain vibes. I don't know why. That's the first thing that came to mind.
Yeah, I guess we'll discuss more next week.
Okay, I look forward to it.
All right, and thank you for joining us for our first episode
of His and Hers History.
Are we doing this all?
I don't know.
Taking turns saying, I like it.
So if you would like to listen to the His and Hers History podcast, you can find it on anywhere where podcasts can be heard. through Podbean. We have a website, HisandHersHistory at .podbean.
We also have an Instagram, His and Hers History.
That's right. We'll be alluding to different stories that are coming up in the next few weeks and into the future. We also have a YouTube channel if that's more your style.
If you have any suggestions, please send them in.
That's right.
We'd love to hear them.
If you've got advice for us, if you think
Advice?
if I should change my voice, do you like the accents? Do you hate the accents? The accents are going to stay.
I for one, like the accent.
I do too, and I love an accent.
Gives you a bit of a Bridgerton vibe.
Bridgerton, the Duke of Hastings. Okay. See you guys.
Bye.
Catch ya.